Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Hey, Mr. President, we have now seen a demonstration, and I want to talk to Senator Merkley about this. I'd ask permission to engage in a colloquy with him, ask consent.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
The Land and Water Conservation Fund is a piece of legislation that has been in place and been law for 50 years, Senator Merkley, as you know. It's been in place for 50 years, and it's expired. And there is overwhelming support for this. A number of us have signed letters. Senator Burr, who's here, I know has been a leader in terms of working on the Republican side. And we have a huge amount of support. But a small little group is objecting to this moving forward. And Senator Merkley, this is showing the dysfunction of here we have a bill, and the leadership cannot get the bill onto the floor. And I just wanted to ask you in terms of your state. I know my state, people love their parks. They love the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I think the same's true in Oregon, isn't it? And this is something that we shouldn't have let lapse, and we've got to put it in place.
My colleague from New Mexico is absolutely correct. For these 50 years that he noted, the Land and Water Conservation Fund has protected millions of acres of our land, including playgrounds and parks, our most treasured national landscapes, all without costing our taxpayers a single dime. It is, without question, our nation's most important and successful conservation outdoor recreation programs. And Oregon specifically has received about $300 million over the past 5 decades, safeguarding areas that are now complete treasures for our state, such as Oregon Dunes and the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area. These special places are part of our heritage, and protecting them has been made possible through this fund. It's a commitment to preserving these special places for future generations in Oregon and throughout the nation. And it also serves to really strengthen the outdoor recreation economy in our state. So what is a win for our heritage is also a win for our rural economy. So this effort to torpedo something of great value in terms of protection of special places and our rural economy is just a step or a stride in absolutely the wrong direction.
Yeah. See, Senator Merkley, and one of the things we face here is that because the Land and Water Conservation Fund has not been reauthorized, then there are members, senators, who are trying to attach this to other pieces of legislation. You and I have worked very well on the Toxic Substances Control Act, which now has over 60 votes. And so this is really held down both pieces of legislation. Land and Water Conservation Fund can't be reauthorized. We can't pass the Toxic Substances Control Act, which has overwhelming support. And so we're in a situation where the leadership needs to step in and say, both of these have huge support in the Senate, bipartisan support. Let's get a vote on them. Let's not continue to have this gridlock and dysfunction. Do you see it that way in terms of how this is playing out on the floor right now?
Well, I absolutely share your perspective on this. In terms of the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, or the Lautenberg Act, as we now call it, this is an effort to remove, and you have championed this in a bipartisan way. You brought this forward. It has been improved through an extensive committee process, and we have really have this shot finally to have a process in which we can take and remove toxic items from everyday products. And a really good example, we're standing here on a carpet, and the carpet's full of flame retardants that don't really retard flames, but definitely cause cancer. And so having those scientifically analyzed and considered as to whether they should be in our carpets or not makes a lot of sense. You think of our little babies crawling in their first months of life on these carpets, their nose right down there to the dust. The dust is attached to these toxic chemicals. And so it has now, I believe your bill this bill has now, and not only is it bipartisan, it has more than 60 or at least 60
Yes.
co-sponsors. And so here we are with this paralyzed process where a few individuals say, well, you know, I guess it's not important to get toxic cancer-causing items out of our household products, and also not important that our states get flexible funds to preserve special places. I would just suggest that rather than blocking such legislation, that folks who have that mind come to the floor and make their case. If they want more cancer for our children, come to make your case. If you want to not preserve special places in America, come and make your case, but do not obstruct this body from being able to have the conversation.
Join the colloquy. Would the senator consent to join the colloquy?
Please, Senator Langford.
Thank you for allowing me to be able to join the conversation. The argument here is not against whether I would want or other members would want cancer-causing items or would want to have the degradation. The problem is the degradation in our public parks and lands. We have an $11.5 billion backlog in our national parks right now. And inexplicably, the Land and Water Conservation Fund does not allow for the maintenance of what we have. The United States government currently manages 29% of the landmass in the United States. And we have a multi-billion-dollar backlog, including in our national treasure, that is the national parks that are out there. This amendment that I have and that others are proposing is to simply say, before we keep adding land, at least at the same rate we're adding more land, we should be maintaining that land. Equivalent to, if you're going to buy a car, you need to at least set aside some money to pay for gas in it. So all that we're asking for is something that's been asked for a long time through multiple committees and multiple hearings. That is, as we engage in purchasing new property, we also make sure we're setting aside dollars from the Land and Water Conservation Fund to actually maintaining what we're purchasing. The dollars that are there already, there's a $20 billion amount that's set aside for Land and Water Conservation Fund. The fund continues to function under the current CR. Appropriations have already been planned and put in place by the committees to be able to put it out there. So this doesn't affect the current ongoing functioning. It only affects new dollars coming to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's already functioning as it is. In fact, it has a 65-year account set aside for it. The challenge now is, are we going to maintain what we have, or are we just going to keep purchasing new lands and not maintaining what we have? So I would say we can protect us from cancer-causing agents, and we can maintain what we have as well.
Thank you, Senator Langford, for that intervention. I think the important point here, and I know Senator Burr's here on the floor, and so I'm going to make a unanimous consent request with regard to TSCA, but let me just say, I can't agree with the amendment that Senator Langford's talked about. I know it's very controversial, the idea of taking money out of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is going to the state side for parks, to the federal side for parks, and dedicating that to maintenance. That's something we should have done in budgets long ago, and the problem is we haven't had adequate budgets for our parks, and so we have a backlog. But Senator Merkley, you mentioned in terms of TSCA, the health and safety of children. There's one person I just want to talk about, a woman by the name of Dominic Browning, who works with an organization called Moms Clean Air Force. And she worries about her kids and the toys and the products they use. She herself survived kidney cancer. And when she was asked by her doctor what caused the kidney cancer, he said, and I quote, "It's one of those environmental ones. Who knows? We're full of chemicals," end quote. So this is about people like Dominic Browning that want to see a cop on the beat that's going to do something about chemicals. And so I think this dysfunction, this inability to deal with two very popular bills is something that we need the leadership to step in, and the leadership has the control of the floor and is able to move forward. So I would ask unanimous consent that a time to be determined by the majority leader after consultation with the Democratic leader, the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 121, S697, a bill to reauthorize and modernize the Toxic Substances Control Act, that the only amendment in order be a substitute amendment to be offered by Senator Inhofe, that there be up to 2 hours of debate equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, that following the use or yielding back of time, the Senate vote on adoption of the Inhofe Amendment, that upon disposition of the substitute amendment, the bill be read a third time and the Senate proceed to vote on passage of the bill as amended, if amended, with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I would ask the author of this unanimous consent request to modify the unanimous consent request to allow an amendment to be considered in the TSCA debate where we would take up the Cantwell-Murkowski bipartisan language on the reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Does the senator so modify his request?
Modification.
Senator from Oklahoma objects. Is there objection to the original request?
I object to the underlying unanimous consent request.
Objection is heard.
And Senator Merkley, we're here at this point where we saw, and we've now been joined by Senator Markey also, and if Senator Markey wants to participate in this colloquy, I would ask consent to do that. We have a situation where we have two pieces of legislation, very popular pieces of legislation that have enough votes to get them on the floor and to deal with a filibuster, and we don't have the ability to do that. And so that's where we are. And it's time that this place abandon dysfunction, abandon the kind of gridlock that we see here, and get these bills on the floor. And as you said, Senator Merkley, if people have an objection, if they have an amendment like the senator from Oklahoma, they can come down here and offer it. I don't know what your thoughts are, but Senator Markey's there, and I'm sure willing to speak on this issue also.
I think what is extraordinary in this situation is that both of these bills have more than 60 co-sponsors, or at least 60 co-sponsors, which, as you pointed out, is enough to close debate and get to a final vote. There was a time not very long ago when even controversial bills were voted on by a single majority. Unfortunately, we're now at the point where virtually every bill has to get cloture because some individual objects to completing debate, even if they're not willing to stand on the floor and debate, which is another topic. And you and I have suggested that indeed we need to change that. So if people object, they have to be on the floor actually speaking to the bill, so it's transparent to the American public. But nonetheless, in this situation, we already have 60 supporters for both of these bills. 60 supporters, co-sponsors, the Land Water Conservation Fund, 60 supporters for TSCA, Lautenberg Act, and your act, and they're both very important to our country. So for us to fail to get this bill on the floor and act is really a dramatic example of the failure of this institution to be able to operate as a legislature. Now, this can be cured. The majority leader could arrange to bring these bills to the floor. We will get closer to bring them to the floor with his support and the current co-sponsors. That would be certainly a tribute to the functioning of the U.S. Senate, but it would also do important work for the people of America. Reauthorizing the funds to protect our special places and creating a system that will operate effectively to get toxic chemicals out of our everyday products. I think it comes as a shock to people across America that we have not regulated a single chemical in toxic products since 1991. And it's just absolutely unacceptable. They believe and expect that the things that they handle every day have gone through a process of being safe, that we're not poisoning ourselves. And it's very shocking to discover that that is simply not the case. So two very important bills to our country, bills that both have 60 supporters. Let's get them to the floor. Let's show that the Senate can actually be a deliberative body and that we can do good work for the future of America.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
I thank the senator from New Mexico and the senator from Oregon for their leadership on this issue. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. There is a certain Dickensian quality to the Senate floor today. We rarely have debate on environmental bills that enjoy not only token bipartisan support, but overwhelming bipartisan support. Today is the best of times, the age of wisdom, and the epoch of belief, because we can debate not just one environmental bill that has overwhelming bipartisan support, but two bills that has overwhelming bipartisan support. Yet today is also the worst of times, the age of foolishness and the epoch of incredulity, because a handful of Senate Republicans have just prevented both of these bills from even getting a vote. First, we had a request to reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund, a program conceived of by John F. Kennedy, who presented Congress with draft legislation for it in 1963. And I am proud to be counted among the more than 60 Senate supporters of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Next, we had a request to consider reform of the Toxic Substances Control Act to protect the American people against these dangerous, toxic chemicals. And I am proud to be a supporter of the language the Senate is expected to vote on, and some have predicted upwards of 85 Senate votes in favor of that environmental bill. So first, a handful of Senate Republicans won't allow a vote on the Land and Water Conservation Fund because they don't like the program. And then other Senate Republicans who do like the Land and Water Conservation Fund won't allow a vote on TSCA because we couldn't act on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So this is nothing short of absurd. It is hard enough to reach a consensus in the United States Senate on any issues, much less environmental issues. But we have yet some of our colleagues who seem determined to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Shouldn't we be able to make this the best of times on both of these bills while we have the chance to do so, instead of perpetuating the worst of times view Americans increasingly have of the ability of Congress to get its job done? I hope that all of my colleagues can come together so that we can agree that here, where there are far more than 60 votes on the Senate floor for two historic environmental bills, that we do not allow for a small handful of members to be able to stop both bills from being able to even be considered here on the Senate floor. Yesterday's agreement on the debt ceiling, on the budget going forward, that is how Congress should be operating. We should take the big issues, try to work together, understand that there are going to be differences of opinion, but when there is overwhelming support for us to be able to move forward. So I thank the gentleman from New Mexico. I thank all who have worked on this issue on a bipartisan basis. And I might say that this bill is just vastly improved, the TSCA bill, from where it was months ago. And I heartily recommend it to my colleagues here on the Senate floor. But the Land and Water Conservation Fund, well, it's something that really goes back so many decades, and it is central to a continuation of the commitment that each and every state in our country is able to make to environmental programs. And so for me, I hope that we can find a way of resolving this issue because it is time for us to take action here on the Senate floor on these two critical environmental issues. And I yield back to the senator from New Mexico.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Note the absence of a quorum.